The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over our little house and the garden behind it. It was a cozy two-story home, the kind you'd expect to see in a small town, with a white picket fence and flower boxes under the windows. Our garden was my favorite place, filled with vibrant flowers and a tall oak tree that provided plenty of shade in the summer. But the best part of the garden was the playhouse. My dad built it for me when I was 8. It was painted a cheerful yellow with white trim, and it had a little porch where we could sit and pretend to be on grand adventures. Tonight was special because my best friend Lily was coming over for a sleepover in the playhouse. We'd been planning it for weeks, and the excitement had been building up all day. "Mom, is everything ready?" I asked as I rushed through the kitchen, nearly knocking over a plate of cookies. "Yes, everything's set," my mom replied with a smile. "Just make sure you girls have everything you need before you head out." Lily arrived just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared. We ran to each other and hugged tightly, jumping up and down in excitement. "This is going to be the best night ever," Lily exclaimed. We gathered our sleeping bags, pillows, snacks, and a flashlight and made our way to the playhouse. The interior was cozy, with little curtains on the windows, a small rug on the floor, and shelves filled with books and toys. We set up our sleeping bags side by side and arranged our snacks in between us. The playhouse felt like our own little world, separate from everything else. "This is perfect," I said, settling into my sleeping bag. "I can't believe we're finally doing this." Lily nodded, her eyes wide with excitement. "I know. Let's tell ghost stories and stay up all night." We spent the next few hours chatting and giggling, our whispers and laughter filling the tiny space. We shared secrets, talked about our favorite books and movies, and made plans for our next sleepover. The playhouse was filled with the warm glow of the flashlight, casting shadows on the walls and adding to the cozy atmosphere. As we finally began to settle down, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. The night was cool, but our sleeping bags were warm, and the sound of crickets chirping outside lulled us into a peaceful state. "Good night, Lily," I whispered, turning off the flashlight. "Good night," she replied softly. We both drifted off to sleep with smiles on our faces, excited for the adventures the night might bring. The night was deepening, and the garden outside was cloaked in shadows. The playhouse, once filled with our chatter and laughter, was now dimly lit by the soft glow of the moon filtering through the small windows. The air was cool, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the wooden ceiling, trying to will myself to sleep. Lily was already breathing softly beside me, lost in dreams. Just as I began to drift off, a faint noise caught my attention. It was a soft, almost imperceptible rustling sound coming from outside. At first I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind. But then I heard it again, a little louder this time. I sat up quietly, straining to hear more clearly. "Lily," I whispered, nudging her gently. "Did you hear that?" Lily stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Hear what?" she mumbled sleepily. "That noise outside. It sounds like, I don't know, something moving." We both sat still, listening intently. The noise came again, a shuffling sound followed by a faint crunch like footsteps on gravel. My heart started to beat a little faster, and I could tell from Lily's wide eyes that she was feeling the same unease. "Maybe it's just an animal," Lily suggested, trying to sound confident. "A raccoon or something." "Yeah, maybe," I agreed, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "But it sounds so close." We both peered out the small window, but the garden was just a dark expanse, the shadows of the trees dancing in the moonlight. There was no sign of movement, nothing to explain the noises we were hearing. The rustling came again, this time followed by a soft thud. Lily and I exchanged nervous glances. "Do you think we should check it out?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lily shook her head. "No way, let's just try to ignore it. It's probably nothing." I nodded, though my curiosity and unease were growing. We lay back down, pulling our sleeping bags up to our chins, trying to find comfort in the familiar surroundings of the playhouse. For a while, the noises seemed to stop, and I began to relax, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. But just as I was about to drift off again, there was a louder noise, a distinct scraping sound, like something dragging across the ground. "Lily," I whispered urgently. I heard it again. I know, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Let's just stay inside and try to sleep. We're safe in here. We both tried to calm ourselves, focusing on the comforting sounds of our breathing and the gentle rustle of our sleeping bags. The noises outside seemed to fade into the background, and slowly, the playhouse returned to its peaceful, quiet state. As I lay there, my mind racing, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, but I kept telling myself that it was nothing, just the ordinary sounds of the night amplified by our imaginations. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a restless sleep, hoping that the morning light would bring clarity and comfort. The playhouse felt different in the dead of night. The cozy charm it had during the day seemed to dissolve, replaced by shadows that stretched and danced in the moonlight. I was jolted awake by a noise that was impossible to ignore, a clear, unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel path outside. "Lily!" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Do you hear that?" She sat up quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "Yes," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "What is that?" The footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate, as if someone was trying to be stealthy but failing. My heart pounded in my chest and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The tension in the air was palpable, making it hard to breathe. "What if it's someone trying to get in?" Lily's voice trembled with fear, mirroring my own thoughts. "We have to stay quiet," I said, trying to sound brave. "Maybe they'll go away." We huddled together in our sleeping bags, clutching each other tightly. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside seemed magnified. The footsteps continued, moving closer to the playhouse, then stopping right outside the door. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and rapid, as my mind raced through 100 different scenarios. Who could it be? What did they want? Why were they here in the middle of the night? Lily's grip on my arm tightened and I could feel her trembling. "What do we do?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We stay put," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "If we stay quiet, they might think no one is here." But deep down, I wasn't sure that would work. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unnerving. It was as if whoever was outside was listening, waiting for a sign of life from within the playhouse. Minutes felt like hours as we sat there, straining to hear any sound, any indication of what was happening outside. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. What if they tried to break in? Should we scream for help? Would anyone even hear us? Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the side of the playhouse, as if something had been thrown against it. Lily and I both jumped, stifling our screams. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I could feel the panic rising within me. "Please, let it be a dream," I thought desperately. But the reality of the situation was all too clear. The footsteps resumed, this time moving away from the playhouse. We listened intently, barely daring to breathe, until the sounds faded into the distance. The silence that followed was deafening, but it brought a small measure of relief. "Do you think they're gone?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but we should stay quiet and wait, just in case." We remained huddled together, our ears tuned to the slightest noise. The playhouse felt like a fragile sanctuary, one that could be shattered at any moment. My thoughts raced, alternating between fear and the hope that dawn would come soon, bringing with it the safety and comfort of daylight. For now, all we could do was wait and listen, hoping that the unsettling sounds outside were nothing more than a passing nightmare. The playhouse felt like a pressure cooker, the silence inside amplifying every creak and rustle from outside. Just as I started to convince myself that the footsteps had been a figment of our imagination, the family dog, Max, began barking furiously. His deep, guttural barks echoed through the night, slicing through the tense silence and making my heart leap into my throat. Max's barking was relentless, each bark a sharp, staccato warning. He only barked like this when something was seriously wrong. Lily and I clung to each other, our earlier fear now mingled with a sense of impending danger. "What is he barking at?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, trying to steady my voice despite the panic rising within me. "But Max never barks like this unless there's something out there." We listened intently, trying to make sense of the chaotic noise. Max's barks were interspersed with growls, and I could hear him scratching at something, probably the back gate. His behavior was so unusual that it sent chills down my spine. "I think I need to look outside," I said, my voice barely audible over Max's barking. "We need to know what's going on." Lily's eyes widened in fear. "Are you sure? What if it's something dangerous?" "We have to know," I said, trying to muster some courage. "Just stay here and keep quiet." I slowly crawled to the small window, every movement feeling exaggerated in the heavy silence of the playhouse. My hands were shaking as I reached for the curtain, pulling it back just a fraction to peer outside. Max was at the edge of the garden, near the back gate, his fur standing on end as he barked and growled at something just out of my line of sight. The moonlight cast long shadows, making it hard to see clearly. I squinted, trying to discern what had him so agitated, and then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving just beyond the gate, partially obscured by the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that someone was indeed out there, lurking in the darkness. "It's someone," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Someone's out there." Lily gasped, her face pale with fear. "What do we do? Should we go get your parents?" I hesitated, my mind racing. Going to the house would mean leaving the relative safety of the playhouse and crossing the dark, open garden. But staying here didn't feel safe either, not with someone out there and Max barking his head off. "We need to get to the house," I decided, my voice firmer than I felt. "We need to tell my parents." Lily nodded, her fear mirrored in my own. We grabbed our flashlights and on the count of 3, bolted from the playhouse, racing across the garden towards the safety of the house. Max's barking grew louder as we approached, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. We reached the back door, flinging it open and slamming it shut behind us. The warmth and light of the house felt like a lifeline, pulling us back from the brink of terror. My parents rushed into the kitchen, alarmed by our frantic entry and the dog's continuous barking. "What's going on?" my dad asked, his voice laced with concern. "There's someone outside," I panted, trying to catch my breath. "Max is barking at them. We heard footsteps, and we saw someone near the back gate." My parents exchanged a worried glance before my dad grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to investigate, while my mum pulled us into a tight hug, her reassuring presence helping to calm our racing hearts. We stayed inside, huddled together, listening to Max's barking and the sounds of my dad moving through the garden. The tension was still thick in the air, but now, at least, we weren't facing it alone. As the minutes ticked by, we waited anxiously for my dad to return, hoping he would bring news that would put our fears to rest. The garden, once a place of joy and adventure, now felt like a shadowy maze filled with unseen dangers. As my dad stepped outside with his flashlight, Lily and I huddled by the back door, my mum's arms wrapped protectively around us. Max's barking had intensified, his growls deep and threatening. Then, cutting through the chaos, we heard it, a loud creak followed by the unmistakable sound of the gate slamming shut. My heart leapt into my throat as I imagined someone fleeing into the darkness. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Yes," Lily replied, her eyes wide with fear. "It sounded like the gate." We strained to listen, our ears picking up the rapid thud of footsteps on the gravel path. Whoever had been in the garden was now running away, the sounds fading into the distance. My dad's flashlight beam swept through the garden, illuminating patches of the lawn and the dark corners near the fence. He moved cautiously, his silhouette tense and alert. Max continued to bark, now circling the area near the gate, his hackles raised. My dad returned a few minutes later, his expression serious. "Someone was definitely out there," he said, closing the door behind him. I couldn't see them clearly, but they ran off when I approached. "What should we do?" I asked, my voice small in the face of this sudden threat. "We'll call the police," my dad replied, his tone firm. "But for now, we need to stay together and keep the doors locked." As my mum dialed the police, Lily and I exchanged worried glances. The playhouse, which had seemed like such a fun place to spend the night, now felt unsafe and exposed. "Should we go back to the playhouse?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "No, it's too risky. We don't know if that person will come back. We should stay in the house where it's safer." Lily nodded, relief washing over her face. "You're right. I don't want to go back out there." Just then, Max began barking again, this time near the front of the house. We peered through the window, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. My dad went to check, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. He returned a moment later, shaking his head. "Nothing out there now," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "The police are on their way. We'll stay inside until they get here." We spent the next hour in a state of heightened alert, every little noise making us jump. The police arrived and did a thorough check of the property, but there was no sign of the intruder. They advised us to keep our doors and windows locked and promised to patrol the area more frequently. When they finally left, we all breathed a sigh of relief, but the tension lingered. My parents set up a makeshift sleeping area in the living room, and we all camped out together, finding comfort in each other's presence. As I lay there, listening to the rhythmic breathing of my family and the occasional rustle of leaves outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that our peaceful world had been irrevocably changed. The Playhouse, once a symbol of carefree fun, now seemed tainted by fear and uncertainty. But as I drifted off to sleep, I held on to the hope that with daylight would come clarity and a sense of safety. And maybe, just maybe, we could reclaim the innocence of our garden and playhouse once more. We dashed out of the playhouse, hearts pounding. The darkness made every step treacherous, but the light of the house gave us hope. We nearly fell inside, slamming the door shut, safe at last, but still shaken. As we gathered our breath inside the house, my dad's flashlight beam swept past the window, illuminating the open garage door. My heart sank. Someone had been inside. "We need to check the garage," I said, my voice shaking. Lily stayed by the door, her eyes scanning the dark surroundings as I crept towards the garage. Inside, tools and boxes were scattered. The back gate was ajar, confirming our fears. My mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. I quickly scanned the room, searching for anything else out of place. "It's clear," I whispered, backing out. But they were definitely here. As I examined the back gate, the truth became clear. Someone had escaped through it. The gate was slightly open, and fresh footprints marked the grass. The night was eerily quiet, every sound magnified by our anxiety. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I dialed my parents. "Mom, Dad, someone definitely got in and left through the gate. I think we need to report this." They came quickly, their faces a mix of relief and concern. "We'll call the police now," my dad said, nodding. The fear lingered, but at least we were taking action. When my parents returned, they quickly assessed the garden. Relief was visible on their faces, but the worry remained. They comforted us, their presence a reassuring anchor. I recounted the night's events, my voice trembling. "Someone got in and fled through the gate. We were so scared." My dad nodded. "We'll secure everything and keep a close eye." Despite the lingering fear, knowing they were handling it made me feel safer. The next morning, we gathered in the living room, the tension of the night slowly giving way to clarity. My parents discussed the intruder and Max's unusual behavior. They decided to install new security measures and reinforce the gate. As I reflected on the experience, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for our safety. The night had been terrifying, but it made me realize the importance of vigilance and security. We were safe now, but I knew we had to stay aware and prepared for whatever might come next.